I do my research ahead of time. You know, is there a place to park and all that? And,
Yeah.
And I get there. I told him, I said, you know, it says no parking tow away. And he's like, oh, it's fine. It's my neighbor's. Like, I'll just explain if anybody gives us a hard time. But I show up early to set up, and somebody knocks on the window, and they're like, you need to get out of here. But they went like 0 to 100. I'm just like, oh, I'm here to interview your neighbor. His name's Dean. Do you know him? They're like, yeah, but you need to get out of here. And
what?
They flipped out. And they're like, you need to leave. And I was like, he'll be here soon. Like, whatever. I just walked away.
Yeah.
And Dean got there. He's like, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know what that guy's deal is. And I was like, he said he called the cops. He was like, it'll just be fun for the pod if they show up. So we're just interviewing. But the whole time in the back of my mind, I'm like, the cops are like on their way.
Huh.
And sure enough, they come.
No way.
Yeah, the cops came, and it was like,
what's some old cranky old people?
yeah,
Dang.
yeah. So they just like made the interview, like my interview. Like, I just had it in the back of my mind the whole time. So
Dude, good on you for just pushing through and realizing the opportunity.
Right? Yeah, because that was like a year in the making too with him, and I was like, I'm not doing this.
Is that in the episode? The cop?
Yeah, it is.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta go listen to that.
Yeah, so they knock, and Dean's like, have you been arrested before? And I was like, no.
Wait, what? There's no way that you would get arrested, right? You're just in a neighborhood?
Yeah, I don't know if it was like because they're trespassing or something like that.
What?
We were on the street, and the guy's like, this is my property. He flipped out.
That's weird.
And then the cops are like, we got to go look in the van because, you know, people have been stealing like bikes and stuff from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And then he like checked it out, and he's like, I did not expect a studio set up in there.
That's how I felt when I walked around the corner.
So he talked to the neighbor, and he was like, can you guys just like do 15 more minutes and call it? So he let us finish too. And
wait, but they wanted you to leave?
But the cops said like, you can finish the interview. But the neighbors wanted us to leave.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
I am continually amazed by how amazing and impressive people are, and then also how freaking weird they are.
That's a good
There's
point.
so many weird people in the world. Like,
Yeah.
the things that people decide to put their energy towards just continuously blows my mind.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like as I get, older, through my research, I've come to realize we're the same age. I think I'm June 93. So you're a few months older than me, but
well, birthday coming up, the big one.
Yeah. 30.
How do you feel about that?
It feels weird. So as I get like older, you just like, obviously I'm going to look back in 30 years and be like, you didn't know what you're talking about. But you know, you start to just put your energy where it really matters and not really sweat smaller stuff anymore.
Totally.
You find out what's fulfilling to you and what's a waste of your time. And
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the process of just like mellowing out with age.
Yeah.
I look back on 25-year-old me, I'm like, wow, you are a loose unit.
Look at us being so wise.
I'm not going to go that far yet, but in comparison to mid to early 20s me,
Oh yeah, I don't want to think back to 21 Nick, but
yeah, embarrassing stuff.
But we can try this again if you want.
Yeah, let's do it. We're round 2. We were just commenting on how, so you're 37 episodes in. I think I don't even know how many episodes in. My sister's the one that keeps track of that. She's the editor extraordinaire, the one that keeps the train on the tracks. But I want to say we're like, we could do the math. I've been doing it 5 years, so got to be on 200 something. And I was just commenting on the fact that when you yanked the power cable by accident with your knee or whatever, that's like one tiny story in a very long line of stories that you're going to be collecting in the coming years of just weird things that happen during podcasting.
That's a good point. Hopefully, I have yet to like lose a whole episode or anything like that.
Yeah, you
will. Like you said, glad it happened early. Like at the beginning, I always go, are all the cameras recording?
Yep.
Yes.
That's impressive.
So far, not too bad. I think we still have the intro, but if in case we don't,
go for it.
Welcome to the van, Payson McElveen.
Thanks. Thank you.
Here we are in Monterey, California. I've got to ask you, have you been here before? Even though I already know the answer.
Been here many times. Started coming here when I would have been 16, 17 years old. So 13 plus years ago now. Is that math right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Because one of the biggest bike races that happens every year is the Sea Otter Classic here in Monterey. In more recent years, I've continued to come. Well, it's not just one of the biggest bike races. I should rewind. It's also the biggest industry and consumer event in cycling. So the Laguna Seca Raceway up off the coast here a little bit basically has turned into a massive expo area. It's insane. Everyone always talks about how small and tightly knit the cycling community and industry are, which is true to an extent. There's a lot of friends of friends sort of vibes, but when you come to the Sea Otter Classic and you see all the tents and the huge expo area, it's just like, oh my God, this industry is actually pretty big.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's been a staple. It is a staple for any of us that are a part of the industry professionally. But in more recent years, I've come to California, period. But this area specifically, sort of like NorCal area, Southern NorCal, every winter for probably the last 5 or 6 years for training, usually in the February-ish time frame. Not Monterey, typically. To be honest, the riding in Santa Cruz and Marin and all that is head and shoulders above Monterey, in my opinion. But yeah, I spend a lot of time in California.
Yeah.
It almost feels like a second home sometimes.
Well, welcome to California again, because again, I was psyched when we've been talking about doing this, and I've been reaching out through doing this process of van casting to people I've followed for a long time, doing inspirational things. And then, once you those are the people that I know of in California, I go, I got to find out if Payson's ever coming to California. And sure enough, here we are in Monterey. So I'm so psyched to be doing this today.
Yeah, me too.
Sea Otter, I did race one time because a camp that I was working at was sponsoring the Sea Otter because they were trying to open a bike park. I raced the downhill race, and that was my first intro to bike racing. I've since done 8 years later one cross country race, so I kind of like dip my toes in. I'm more of a runner.
Okay,
but that was intense. I didn't crash. That was my biggest claim to fame.
Nice.
Finish in the middle of the pack, but staying on the bike was definitely my favorite part about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I can't say that. I actually tried to qualify for dual slalom. Did crash in that. So I'll stick to cross country casual riding for now.
Yep.
But for you and the people who don't yet know Payson McElveen, what is your story into this world of professional bike riding, bike racing, and all the other extracurricular side of things with biking? Because as I was driving here, I think almost everybody in the world has ridden a bike, and you have now made that a career.
Yeah.
That is so wild.
It is. So yeah, it's funny you say that too, because I very like anything you do, anything you live day to day, it's impossible not to start taking it for granted to an extent, I think. But I do my best now and then to kind of zoom out and have perspective. And for whatever reason, just a few days ago, I guess late last week, I was at home in Durango, and my dad came up because his 70th birthday is this month, and I wanted to give him a new bike for his birthday, like a top of the line race bike. I wanted it to be a surprise, so I tricked him into coming up to Durango for a few days and surprised him with this bike. But anyway, I was out on a training ride one of the days he was there, and I don't know why, but it just hit me during the ride how weird it is that I am just doing my job. Like it's kind of hard to put into words, but just the fact that you go out and bike ride for many hours every day, and that is your career, is so strange in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
And I got back to the house and I was just like, Dad, this is so weird. Like, how did I get here? This is so strange. And we had some fun conversation that night just about the weirdness of the path to get to that point. And yeah, I mean, I think it's, especially in this day and age when there's so many, and we commented on this kind of during the first part of our conversation, which maybe got cut out. The cycling has so many different styles and disciplines. It's got to be one of the sports that has just the most different ways to do the sport, whether it's downhill, like you mentioned, or even like track cycling or BMX or, even things as niche as like track lacrosse, which is like fixie riding inspired cyclocross racing. Like there's so many tiny niche things. And then you've got the Tour de France, which obviously is the most well known. And so the folks that get to do it full time, whether they're a lifestyle sort of athlete or fighting for the yellow jersey in the Tour, there's so many different paths to get to those respective points. And mine has certainly been very winding, like a lot of folks probably. But yeah, I guess over the years, I've just sort of followed my nose. I've done a little bit of everything early on, raced some World Cups, even did some guest riding on a higher level road team to see if I was into that. Went to college and did some collegiate cycling and dipped a toe into some different disciplines there. But I've just always gravitated towards the off-road stuff and also the endurance stuff. I've really, I don't know, just enjoyed the fitness side of things my whole life, even going back to like middle school and in recess. I was the kid that, would outrun everybody else. And, in high school basketball, I was the one that was always really gung-ho to like beat everyone in the sprints, at the end of practice, that sort of thing. So I don't know why, but I've always gravitated towards that. And we can get into all the extracurricular stuff that kind of goes along with the career at this point. But yeah, whether it's like an hour and a half cross country or a big solo fastest known time mission challenge ride thing, I've just always enjoyed kind of the off-road endurance side of the sport.
I heard you say in a podcast, I don't remember if it was in yours or someone else's, but you said you are a professional recreator.
Yeah.
I thought that's really cool. Again, it's such a unique career where you're obviously doing something you love. But at what age was it for you that you realized that biking could be a career? Or was it later on, well past childhood, that you kind of thought that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I say that sort of tongue in cheek to, kind of minimize it in a funny way. But when I was probably let's see, what year, how old would I have been? I would have been like 7, 8 years old when Lance started winning all the tours. And that kept it very front of mind, especially since I grew up kind of in rural Texas outside of Austin. Lance living in Austin, he was obviously a hero throughout the world, but he was sort of like our hometown hero in a way too. So that certainly kept cycling front of mind. My dad raced as well and was a high-level athlete. And so that sort of kind of always kept it simmering in the background. But I guess I gravitated more towards mainstream sports throughout school just because it is what my friends were doing. But I had a bit of a recurring knee injury early in high school basketball that sort of nudged me towards bike racing a little bit more. And I don't know, I guess it was around then, like 14, 15 years old, where I felt like I want to be a professional athlete and this might be the thing that makes the most sense. Knowing very little, knowing almost nothing about the sport at that point, obviously. And certainly knowing nothing about how it would evolve in the future. But yeah, I guess that was sort of the age where I thought I want to be a professional athlete of some kind. That's what I'm dreaming about. And from what I can tell, it's all about just grinding and working super, super hard. And cycling has always been really good at glorifying hard work and pain and suffering and all that sort of thing, for better or worse. And so I just immersed myself in that sort of mindset, I guess, early on. And it gave me a lot of direction through high school. I wasn't necessarily the most social kiddo, I think, because of that. But it helped me kind of like skip maybe some of the unhealthy-ish stuff that can happen at that age too.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome that you kind of like had that inclination toward something healthy and then also knew that you wanted to take it as far as you now have. Early, just a bit ago, you mentioned you just kind of glossed over some college racing, but you had quite a bit of success in college, right? Can we talk about that? And is that also then this moment of you're seeing your dreams actualized and you're still quite young, and then you're like, maybe take it even further, at that point, what are your feelings going through college, winning national championships and things like that?
Yeah, that was a really important phase because it was this, in hindsight, it was sort of this like, this bridge that I needed sort of to make it, so to speak, because coming from Central Texas and not having much of a youth development program, not really having people to train with. I did some through a local bike shop, but they were sort of downtown Austin, which was a good, 30, 40-minute drive for us. And so it was pretty rare that I got to ride with other people. And so I really developed this like hard-nosed, just like solo work ethic. And at times it was almost this like, this is my chosen path, and it doesn't need to be fun, and I'm just going to work harder than anybody else. And I think on the national scene as a junior racer, I sort of like performed above maybe what I should have on paper a lot of times, just because I was so freaking, like I was training like a professional from age 16 or 17, just in terms of dedication. And the other kids I was competing with were almost exclusively coming from Colorado or California and had, big mountains to train in and these incredible youth programs, and were basically like playing on their bikes with their friends and almost just, and for sure working hard. But I guess what I mean is they had so many advantages on me that I didn't understand at the time. But even still, finishing third at nationals, fifth at nationals, or whatever as a 17-year-old, which is kind of where I was finishing, I was just beating myself up. I was like, I have to be the best. I have to be the best. Why am I not the best? And over time, I sort of realized, well, there's these incredible communities kind of in these mountain towns typically, and Durango, Colorado seems to be the place. And a lot of that, there's a lot of factors. Durango Devo Durango is a town of like 20,000 at this point, and Durango Devo has almost 1,000 registrants every year, which is just an absurdly large percentage of the population. And they just churn out Olympians and Tour de France stage winners and like world champions just annually, like you would not believe. And they also have this incredible collegiate cycling program at Fort Lewis College. So I sort of zeroed in on this place. So anyway, I went to college there, and I brought this attitude of just like almost monk-like focus, and was treating it like a job. Like I was I'd been a pro for 20 years and didn't necessarily, I guess where I'm going with this is I didn't have necessarily the healthiest or most sustainable mindset towards cycling and trying to be good at it. And so eventually I was just immersed in this community, whether it be the collegiate cycling program at Fort Lewis or some of the other pros that live there, or like the Durango Devo kiddos. And I realized that being fast and working hard could be fun. And so there was this 3 or 4 year period where I was kind of dragged kicking and screaming into this attitude of being more relaxed and like playing more on the bike. And what I didn't realize at the time is that that's actually what is necessary to make it, because it has to be sustainable. Like if I'd kept that mindset that I had as a 16, 17-year-old, there's no way I'd be sitting here right now still doing it. Like no chance.
Like burnout and all that.
Oh yeah.
Mental,
because
physical.
It's just, I mean, take today, for example, like I had a little over a 5-hour ride today with a bunch of efforts, efforts at the beginning of the ride, efforts at the end of the ride. The day before that, I had, what did I have yesterday? I had another interval workout, 4.5 hours with intervals. The day before that, I had a 4-hour ride. Tomorrow I have another 5-hour ride. And like, you have to love it. Like to ride that much and to ride that hard day in and day out, anyone can get themselves out the door and be really keyed up for a single day. But when you're asked to do that day after day after day for 300 plus, because I mean, our off seasons are like 2 weeks, and then do that for 10, 15, 20 years, which is what it actually requires to reach the highest level. Like there's no way you can do that if you're not loving it.
Yeah.
And so collegiate cycling, to get back to your original question, collegiate cycling was fun. Like I got to race on the track. I got to race cyclocross. I got to race on the road. I got to be bad at stuff and have it be okay. Like that was the thing that I was really missing as a teenager. Like I just wouldn't allow myself to be bad at stuff. Like I'd show up to races that I knew suited me. And so my skill set stayed more narrow. Anyway, when I got to college, like I had all these deficiencies. Like I wasn't comfortable on really steep terrain because we don't have that in Texas. I wasn't comfortable on trails with exposure because we didn't have that in Texas. Long climbs, I sucked because we didn't have that in Texas. And so I was really, really good and I could beat almost anybody in the country on one style course. And then the second it was different than that, I really struggled. And so being willing to finally like relax a little bit into this collegiate cycling program that really encourages you to try different stuff and have being bad at stuff be a good thing, because that's where growth happens, was just super key. And I'm so lucky that I kind of had the opportunity to do that.
I think that's huge, because I think maybe some other people would look at getting beat up a steep hill or something, or a steep terrain course, and say, I guess this isn't for me. But you saw that as an opportunity to look at it as a thing you could get better at. But going back then a little bit to teens and maybe early college, where do you think you got that like hardcore focus from? Like training like more than most of your peers would? Was it from like your dad riding? Like, where do you think you got that?
I really have no idea. It's a great question. I don't know why I've wanted it so badly. I think that's a good question. Yeah, because it does kind of just get down to the root of just like why you want something really badly and why you are consumed by it. It's just something that I would have to go back to 15-year-old me and ask, why I wanted it really badly. But that hasn't wavered for a second. Like I've had periods where I've really struggled, whether it be, multiple races in a row or an entire year where things seem to go poorly, but the desire to just work hard has never gone away. And it's going to be interesting to see now 30, right, like in the meat of my prime, you can't help but think about, all right, I've been competing at this level basically for 10 years now, and I probably can for another 10, maybe a little more. But what comes after that? Like when you turn, when you're not racing at the highest level professionally anymore, and you've had this like assassin's mindset for hard work, very intrinsically motivated hard work for so many years, like what's it going to be to try to turn that off? Because that sort of mindset isn't necessarily appropriate in all aspects of life.
Sure.
So that'll be an interesting transition.
Yeah.
I guess we'll cross the bridge when we get there.
Well, I'm sure biking will be in some ways in your life, even beyond racing, competing too, because that's the beautiful thing about biking too. You can do it all the time. It's
true. And especially in Durango, we have some men and women who were the very best to ever do it. One that comes to mind is Ned Overend, who won the first ever mountain bike world championships in 1990. And I think he's pushing 70 now, and he still shows up to the Tuesday night group ride every night and just throws down. Like he's so freaking good still. So he never turned it off.
Yeah.
Which, that's one way to do it too.
That's fun. I think for some things, people just click with something, and for you it was biking. And as we talk about that, and for me, having gone from like a football player in high school, and then my senior year, I just stopped playing football and I started running. And like 8 months later, I did my first ultra. Then I raced in college, and now I'm asking myself, like, what did I want to? I didn't hang out with people for a whole summer because I was just training.
Yeah,
like I had that same kind of like focus of, you're giving up a lot of things towards this goal, and you don't know like what's going to happen at the end of it. But I don't know. It made me feel fulfilled, at the end of a hard run or hard race or something like that. Do you get those same feelings of satisfaction after like today, a super hard workout that obviously it's like can be grim in the moment, but you probably get some sort of feeling of you're working toward a goal, or it feels good after you're done or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And today was big for me mentally, just because I haven't felt great for a few days, and today was a little bit of a breakthrough, and I saw some power numbers that I haven't seen yet this year, and I'm excited about it. You know, that there's something so satisfying about doing something hard for a while, like really having to earn something. And at this point in my career, I know kind of the blueprint. I know roughly how long it's going to take for stuff to start really clicking, like fitness wise. And so you sort of get trust that it's going to happen. But even so, you know, it doesn't always happen the same way. It actually rarely happens the same way. And so sometimes it's like, oh man, when's it going to happen? Is it going to happen in time for the first big race? And so then when it just sort of unlocks and you just feel very capable and you're sort of like, yeah, my body is finally that weapon again that I'm familiar with. Like that's a huge high because it takes so much work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's when you get the most endorphins, right? If it was easy, then it would be, cool, I did it. But like overcoming obstacles and things, that's got to be great.
Yeah, and it's just fun. Like that discovery, it's like you get to, for me, when I do a really hard workout, it's sort of like you get to enter a different plane almost of like the universe, or you go into a little bit of a parallel universe because you get so hyper focused on riding your bike fast. And it sounds silly, but there's all of these little things, these tiny little things that change being able to ride your bike fast, and your entire universe just revolves around those little details. And you get so in the moment, like you're just fully optimized for one thing and nothing else in the world matters. And I think as humans, like there's got to be something subconsciously that's really rewarding for us there. Because I mean, we humans are some of the best endurance athletes on the planet, like period. No matter if you compare us to like, I mean, that's what we evolved to do, is chase down antelope, like run fast enough, long enough, the antelope just keels over because it's exhausted. And so I think there's something there probably that gets unlocked. And yeah, I'm still super addicted to it.
I think about those hard efforts on like when I'm running a track interval session.
Yeah.
Do you get excited by that? Because I go into those sessions going, this is going to suck. This half marathon's going to absolutely hurt.
Yeah.
And of course, once the gun goes off, you're like, good. It still sucks, but like, do you get those pre-workout or pre-race like nerves? I get them like a week out from like a track workout.
It totally depends on the circumstances. This morning I messaged my coach, and he's really good about, I actually just changed coaches this year for the first time in a long time, but he checks in with me almost every morning, and he's like, how you feeling? I said, I'm feeling good today. I'm excited. And that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes for obvious reasons, you're not looking forward to the workout, whether it's weather or you're just deep in the hole fatigue wise or whatever it is. And then with races too, like when so for example, these days I'm focused on something called the Grand Prix series, which is a 7-month long points chase series with 7 rounds basically. And, you know, if you feel a little bit off physically, if you know training hasn't been going well, coming back from injury, coming back from illness, whatever it is, and you're basically looking down the barrel of trying to salvage as many points as you can, maybe on a course that doesn't suit you very well. When you wake up those mornings and the alarm goes off super early, sometimes it's like, today this feels like a job, and it's going to be really goddamn hard. And then other days you're just on the front foot fitness wise. Maybe, you know, you have a scenario where it's like you're sitting 4th in points, but you're almost 3rd in points, and you could go out, have a good race, and land on the overall podium. All of those little incentives or upsides still to this day get me really fired up for sure.
I think, again, not to go back to running, but you have to get through those hard days where it feels like a chore or something, and then you get those like super high moments too, where you're in flow and you're like, this is why I do what I do.
Yeah.
But again, it makes it worth it when you do have not the greatest like feeling going into it.
Yeah, and I mean, one day I am kind of going back to what happens after this career. Like I am looking forward to one day exploring kind of all the other ways that there are to get that same sort of feeling of reward, not so focused on competition or like the razor's edge of performance, because there's so many different ways to enjoy the bike. And in the scheme of things, bike racing is such a tiny sliver of the ways that people enjoy bike riding.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to explore. So
when you talk about like different ways to, enjoy biking or even beyond that, when it comes down to like your identity, can we talk a little bit about your injury last year and how you had to bounce back from that, but there was a period of time when you couldn't bike.
Yeah.
Right. So, can you talk a little bit about that and what that meant, and if it caused you to reflect on what life beyond racing might look like as well?
Yeah. I wouldn't say the injury really caused that much reflection per se, for better or worse, because I was just so focused on coming back. Like I said, I'm focusing on this Grand Prix now, where it's this points-based season-long competition, and so getting injured right before the first round and knowing that I wasn't going to be like I was going to lose points because I wasn't going to be able to race that first round. You just immediately go right back into that, like, what do I need to do to get back in the action? So I was on the stationary bike, I think 48 hours after surgery, I want to say, at most. It might have even been less. It might have even been like a day. And so you're just always, like I said, for better or worse, like you are always pushing the boundaries of that edge of performance, even if that means like salvaging a season, which is what I was up against last year. And that's where I think like being a professional athlete isn't necessarily the healthiest thing always. I think it can be and usually is healthy, but there are scenarios where, letting your body heal at a more healthy rate would have been the healthier thing to do. But I needed to get back ASAP. So I basically was doing everything I could to get back as fast as I could.
I mean, that is I broke my collarbone when I was like 5.
Yeah.
Not doing something cool. I went headfirst into a tree on a snow toboggan when I was like 5.
That sounds pretty cool.
And
that's basically what I did, just on a bike.
Yeah. Well, again, doing something cooler. And I remember having to wear this like brace in first grade, and I was like so embarrassed. I'm like, they're gonna think I'm weird. But, when it happened, like, what were your emotions then? Were you going into something that is, I don't know, again, 48 hours after surgery, that's pretty epic to be training again, but immediately are you thinking about, wow, like the effort I put in and suddenly kind of things are halted? Like at what point do you go, this I'm going to use like toward my benefit of like mentally focusing in on the future, and how much of it was like, this sucks?
Yeah. I mean, you're always trying to find silver linings, obviously. And if there's one of the funny things about how connected we are these days, and how, someone in my position, like, we make these things pretty public. It's just sort of part of, I guess, what's expected of you in a way. And for me, it feels natural to do it that way too. But it also means that you get a lot of people weighing in. And so there was a lot of like, you're going to come back stronger. Like, it won't seem like it now, but like breaking bones is like, it's going to be good for you in the long run. It's like, I don't know.
At least you have positive people, right?
Yeah. I've broken a lot of bones at this point in my life, and I'm, jury's still out on whether, all told, it's a good thing. But anyway, I mean, you definitely try to look for silver linings, and I did a pretty good job of managing it overall. I think the thing that really like sunk my ship in terms of having a really good first race back is that I was trying to come back in time for one of the biggest races of the year, called Unbound, which is this 200-mile gravel race, and it was pretty tight, but the surgeon said it was okay. And in terms of training, I'd spent so much time. So the collarbone was no problem. Collarbones are like, you can be racing again within a few weeks if you played it. But I broke my hand. Which one was it? Left hand. This metacarpal in my thumb. And all humans will know thumbs are very important to us being able to do things. And so I couldn't hold on to the handlebars for a long time. And so that was the big challenge. I was just inside a lot, riding inside a lot. And when you're riding inside a lot, you can get pretty sharp fitness-wise because you can do a lot of controlled intervals, but you can't go do 6-hour rides day in and day out, which is what I need to do to be good at my style of cycling. So anyway, I was in a little bit of a fitness hole, and speaking of California, coming out here often stands me in good stead for getting in shape. And so I decided to do, like 2 weeks before Unbound, a hyper-focused training camp, and got out here and got COVID, tested positive for COVID the day I got here. Oh. So instead of this last-ditch training camp, I was just sitting in this Airbnb by myself for a week, just twiddling my thumbs like, oh my God, what are we doing here? So anyway, long story short, that was a challenging period this past year that definitely set me back a lot, but it's just a lot of that same mindset of, it really is the same mindset that you take into training when you have to get intervals done or a long ride and it's raining sideways and 38 degrees, where you kind of hunker down mentally and just focus on the controllables and do the best job you can is the same mindset that, for me at least, I have coming out of an injury or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great mindset. And again, I can't imagine going through that again with all the effort that went into it. And then, sometimes you just have to take those hard times with the good as well and then overcome, which you definitely have the mindset for. So that's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a lot. Like I'm a big fan of other sports and mainstream sports. And if you pay any attention to professional sports of any kind, whether it's mainstream or something a little bit more niche, at the highest level, it is at least as much about dealing with setbacks as it is how good you are when everything goes smoothly. Like, I mean, the Los Angeles Lakers right now, for example, they're on this tear, trying to make a good playoff seed last minute because they've just been decimated by injuries all year. And, LeBron's playing with this messed up foot and is definitely playing at like 75, 80%, but he just has to because the playoffs are about to start. So no matter the sport and no matter the level, it's half the battle for sure.
Do you think you succeed more when your back is against the wall of sorts like that?
I don't know.
You have that focus from, back in the day.
Yeah.
At your core.
Yeah. I think just in general, like the harder a race, the better for me. But I don't know that like the level is high enough at this point that if you have any setback, it's just a setback. Like it's not going to help you focus more or anything like that, in my opinion.
You mentioned Unbound, and there's an awesome video about that too. and speaking of that, the way I originally had come across you and your whole brand of trying hard and succeeding at biking, and it's just been so fun to watch. But the original video I saw was the White Rim.
Oh yeah,
Time
yeah.
Utah.
Yeah,
it was a great film, and also it just was so inspiring too because, well, I loved that it really showed like the relationship with you and your dad, and like it was this whole like team effort, and again, just that's why I wanted to have you on here because it showed like your determination to do this thing, and so can we talk a little bit about? I think I mentioned earlier, kind of like outside of racing, the more, fun extracurricular side of things. Not that racing isn't fun, but some of these challenges that you kind of bring upon yourself. And, there's a few that come to mind, but starting off with this White Rim, like how do these ideas come up? And then obviously the public sees it through these great videos that just show so well the act itself.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so I have to give credit to Red Bull actually for the White Rim idea. It turned out that they'd actually had an idea for doing the White Rim, fastest known time, and sort of popularizing that for almost a decade, and they were just waiting for the right rider to be on the roster, the right athlete to be on the roster. And when I signed with them, I think within, I don't know, a year and a half, we did that.
Wow.
And I mean, I think it's funny, like, Red Bull is sort of the dream sponsor for athletes for many reasons, but once you once you sign with them and you're in that you're in that family, because that's really what it is. Which is, it still blows my mind that, you know, they're the biggest brand that almost any athlete's going to work with. Maybe, I don't know, like Nike might be comparable in terms of size, but like they're one of the biggest brands that an athlete can work with. They somehow maintain this family vibe that still just blows my mind. There's so many folks that I'm on a first name basis with there, but despite that, like, or in addition to that, the real value for me, and I think many other Red Bull athletes will say this too, is that they are so forward thinking and they just have incredible ideas for helping give their athlete a platform, or put one of their athletes in a position to kind of introduce new ideas to their sport or redefine their sport in a way. And I mean, there's a million examples of this. You could go through all of the different athletes that they're partnered with and all the different sports that they've been associated with. But for me, that was kind of the White Rim was that for the first example of that. Like, you know, in all of my peers, you know, we're doing these standardized races. We have a race circuit. It's very tradition bound. But what if, you know, we've looked towards ultra running a little bit, mountain running a little bit, where fastest known time culture is just huge. Like, why does that not really exist nearly as much in bike riding and bike racing? And so, you know, it certainly existed before we did it, without a doubt, in bike riding, but it wasn't nearly as big. And that White Rim fastest known time popularity, you know, just caught like wildfire. And there was a few years there where there was just people going out there constantly to not just try to break the record, but see how they stacked up, because there were plenty of people that did it that weren't necessarily of a professional level. And that was really the main goal, was kind of creating something fun that wasn't a standardized race, but was an adventure that people could go on and experience one of the most beautiful places in the country, and make some awesome memories. And that was just kind of the first introduction for me into kind of that mindset. And then I was like, man, this is freaking awesome. And I want to do something like this every year, as long as my race schedule allows.
Yeah, I was going to ask like how these things kind of stack up against race schedules too. And then your kind of feeling of, do you have a preference? If you had to pick, like, I'm going to, you know, do this race, or, I mean, do you ever have the option of picking a race over something like that, for example?
It's a good question. So in my style of cycling, we're sort of more and more athletes are kind of gravitating towards being individuals rather than parts of teams. So on the road cycling side of things, you have teams, and it's much more like a mainstream sport like the NBA, where a team has 28 roster spots, 30 roster spots, whatever it is, and you're employed by that team, and all the riders have the same sponsors with the exception of a few, you know, random endorsement deals on the side, and their schedule is determined for them, and they all have specific jobs. It's almost like they have positions like, Shaq was a center, Kobe Bryant, was a guard. Like in road cycling, it is like that. There's GC leaders, there's classic specialists, there's domestiques. With my side of things, there are so many incredible endurance off-road events these days that you have to be an all-arounder because they're all vastly different. And then also, because most of our events aren't televised, you have to find other ways, or coverage takes place differently. And so it really benefits you to, create a fan base on your own rather than just being a name on a results sheet. Mm-hmm. And there are riders in the World Tour whose personality, like they really lean in to try to develop personalities, and they become fan favorites because they're a little bit more charismatic or this, that, and the other. But pretty much like the riders that have the biggest followings have it because they are winning races. And with this more like, I don't even really know how to put it, but there's a good handful of us at this point that are individuals and have the opportunity to do stuff outside of our specific race schedule and kind of cultivate followings and cultivate a fan base, not through race results alone, which is a good thing because unlike most sports, like you spend most of your time losing. Like bike racing is so hard, and mechanical issues come into play, and like what courses suit you are so diverse that like the absolute most dominant athlete might win at most like 30 or 40% of their races, which in any other sport, like if the New England Patriots won 30% of their games, they wouldn't even make the playoffs, let alone be the best team.
Yeah.
So, that's a little bit of a tangent, but I guess that's sort of like the ecosystem that has developed. And so being an individual is very beneficial, and I get to pretty much pick my own schedule for that reason. So, and that's where like navigating a career really becomes an art, I guess. What events do you do? Which events do you skip so that you can train for another event? And different athletes make different decisions in terms of maybe when they want to do some sort of big non-competitive project versus focus on some race. And I think it's one of the things that makes it really interesting. And some athletes, lament that it's not more like European road cycling. But I think from my standpoint, it's good that it's not, because that already exists. It probably means there's not room for more of the same thing.
That's fun that it's so diverse, though. You get to do a ton of different things within cycling.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about some of those other ones too, because when you got here today, we were talking about someone who's been on this show before, a friend of yours, Chris Burkhardt, and your relationship with him and how that kind of led to another one of these awesome things, cycling across Iceland.
Yeah.
That is just so stinking cool.
Yeah.
And was it your idea? Was it his idea? And yeah, I've never been to Iceland, but seeing that too really like piques your curiosity about what the human body can do. And then also it's just like, what an amazing place that you got to go do something incredible like that.
Yeah. I mean, if I remember correctly, it was mostly his idea, that ride across Iceland, actually. And it kind of came about because he was trying to recruit me for this ride in the West Fjords region of Iceland. He'd put together, with some help of some locals, this new bikepacking route, this 550-mile bikepacking route, I think, in the West Fjords, which is sort of like, so Iceland is sort of an oval, I guess, but off to the northwest, there's basically this hand shape that's just this crazy big peninsula with just a million fjords. And so if you trace the coastline of those West Fjords and stretch it out, it's the same coastal distance as the entire perimeter of mainland Iceland, so to speak, if that makes sense. So it's a really interesting region. Anyway, he was trying to recruit me to come do this bikepacking trip, and it was in the middle of my race season, so it didn't make a ton of sense. And so I was kind of waffling, kind of going back to like that challenging decision-making career-wise, like what do you do that's maybe fulfilling and fun and makes sense from a content standpoint versus what races are you going to skip to go do that thing. And so he decided to kind of dangle a carrot out there, which was like, I think on paper, like you could ride from coast to coast across Iceland. No one's tried it in a single push, but like, I think it could be done. What do you say we try to make that happen after this West Fjords bikepacking trip? And I was like, oh, that would be interesting. And at first it was kind of like, oh, that's an interesting novelty. But the more I thought about it, the more I studied Iceland, the more I was like, whoa, this would be the absolute ride of a lifetime. And so I committed, and the bikepacking trip aspect was incredible. Loved it. So beautiful. But the ride coast to coast across Iceland was just such a incredible opportunity. It was like this perfect, for me, it was this perfect combination of athletic challenge paired with adventure, like true adventure. And every year I appreciate that sort of ride more, like this sort of this marriage of like high performance athleticism paired with just true adventure. And like, can you because the thing about a bike is it's pretty much the most efficient way to get from A to B under human power. And as we've tried to film these things, we've really gotten appreciation for that. Like the film crews are just like, we cannot keep up with you. And it is so cool to reinforce just how incredible bikes are. And so I've really gotten hooked on this concept. And yeah, we made a little YouTube film out of it. I should say it's actually on Red Bull TV, I think. And it was one of the coolest bike rides I've ever done. Yeah, bar none.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What an amazing tool. Like, again, this vehicle has allowed you to, be in community with so many awesome people and visit these amazing places.
Yeah.
All through a bike. And
yeah, and I mean that's one of the best parts is the ride itself was so awesome, but at least half the battle was like developing the route, and in a place like Iceland that's so volatile geologically, like we had to make a change to the route the day before because this thermal vent, which is basically like, well, it was a mini volcano basically underneath a glacier, erupted and melted a massive portion of this glacier and just created this huge flood that wiped out the end of part of my route. And so we're like, oh shit, like, okay, what are we gonna do? And so then we're just in contact with all these local cyclists, some of the local meteorological folks, like where can we go? How can we adjust it? And it becomes this really, really fun, engaging team effort where you have to actually immerse yourself in the place and the people. And it's such an incredible learning opportunity. Like I learned a huge amount about Icelandic culture, about how they go about their day-to-day lives, what it's like to live on an island in the middle of the Atlantic that's literally just fire and ice, like how intense that is. So yeah, just everything else, like forgetting everything else, those sorts of things are such a special way to experience the world and learn the world. And that's what I'm just super hooked on.
Wow, what a wonderful way to connect with people too. That again, you wouldn't have without a bicycle too.
Yeah.
So through this career of yours, I'm sure you've gotten questions from fans too about, what it takes to ride bikes professionally and things like that. If you can reflect back a little bit on what you would have told yourself at 15 years old, what is some of the advice that you would give to people who are, considering, going super hardcore focus on biking like you did, or how would you kind of help to steer them so that they, don't get burnt out and things like that?
Yeah. Well, I guess it totally depends on what their goals are. If a young rider wants to compete in the Tour de France, my answer is going to be very different than if they want to be, competing in Red Bull Rampage or doing something like I'm doing, for example, because there's different processes there and different trajectories. Getting to obviously I'm not racing the Tour de France, but I have many friends who do, and their process, with a couple of exceptions, it's pretty linear. You could say like there's sort of a blueprint there, like a step-by-step process. But I think there are some commonalities, and the single biggest one, which I kind of mentioned earlier, is just that you have to love it day in and day out. The first thing you need to fall in love with is doing hard work on the bike and riding for a long time and doing, an interval set in hour 5, for example. That's the first thing you have to love. You can't fall in love with the idea of competing in the Tour de France or whatever else and hope that you can reverse engineer it. As a young rider, I think it's very natural to dream big and dream about those far away things. Of course, you have to have long-term goals and inspiration and all that sort of thing. But if you're dreaming about that and not loving the day-to-day work and not loving all the little stuff, it's unlikely.
Yeah. It's like NBA dreams. You want to go pro, but do you want to do drill in your driveway?
Do you want to take 1,000 shots before a game? It's funny, but I probably follow the NBA more closely than I follow bike racing. And just listening to the way those guys work and what they have to actually do is crazy. Like doing a massive strength workout after a game is like, what? But like, that's what you have to do. Or go, you know, get to the arena like 4 hours before tip off and take 1,000 shots. Like that is ludicrous.
Yeah.
But that's what you have to do. And that stuff doesn't get talked about that much. You see, you know, some insane dunk from John Morant on House of Highlights, and people just think that like he was born that way. He was not born that way.
Yeah.
To an extent he was, but not completely.
Yeah. Fall in love with the process, really.
Yeah. And then also like surround yourself with people. I am such a big believer in environment. I think environment is so key. And there is some like baked in privilege there. Like not everyone, no one gets to choose their environment at first. But having the ability to choose your environment later, like some people have more opportunity to do that than others. But I think everyone has some control over it. Like who are the people that you associate with? So even if there's a junior racer who, grew up in an area where they don't have a bunch of people to ride with, or they don't have the best terrain to ride, you can still surround yourself with people that, you know, also want to work hard, also have a good attitude, also have, you know, healthy outlooks, all that sort of thing. And so I think environment is also a huge key. And then the first opportunity you get to go be somewhere where you can learn from others, where you're definitely not the best, is super crucial too. You don't have to be the worst in the room, but like you definitely want to be far from being the best in the room, and then you'll just rise to the occasion theoretically.
That's a great word. Yeah. And I think that can go for so many things outside of biking too, like you said, with any sports, or just, you know, be passionate about what you do without those monetary goals or fame goals in mind.
Yeah.
Those things come, I think, with hard work and if you love what you're doing along the way.
Absolutely.
Now, just a couple last things I want to talk about too, because again, I love having people on. Grab a drink. Yeah, whatever you want.
A third.
I actually, do you ever watch the Joe Rogan Experience?
Yeah.
Do you see the Protect Our Parks episodes?
I don't think so.
It's like when he has the comedians on, all four of them.
The super loose, like they're all 12 beers deep episodes.
Yeah. Mark Norman, Shane Gilson, Ari Shafir. Have you seen the Eagle that they have?
No.
It's like this Eagle beer funnel, actually.
Oh.
And I was trying to get Ari Shafir to do this show. So I got one of...
Dude, you have connections, I've noticed. You've had some hitters on the episode.
Well, thank you.
How have you pulled that off?
This is the Eagle.
No way.
It's like, I got this because, you know, I've never used it. It's a prop for me. But it's they drink out of it on the Joe Rogan. I was like, you put a Red Bull in that.
So you... I have shotgun Red Bulls.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
You want to be the first person to shotgun the Eagle?
I would not sleep tonight. If we were doing this episode before 2, 100% I would. So you just pour it in here?
Uh-huh.
And then, wow. Dude. I bet whoever makes this does very well and sells.
Yeah, well, they sold a bunch after they had it on the Joe Rogan thing. But I would say...
quick tangent. How are you pulling these guests? You have amazing connection. Like,
thank you.
I had a cheat code in Red Bull. They just had an incredible... Like, their list of connections are crazy, and then it sort of builds on itself. But you've just, like, hit the ground running.
Well, I would say that 1% of the people that I invite on, like, get back to me. But, you know, that's... You know, I reach out to people who are inspiring me, like yourself, and I'm so appreciative when, you know, like you message back and you're like, thanks for the support, and you're willing to do this. But most of the time, you don't hear back from people, and that's just the nature.
You're just taking shots in the dark.
Yeah,
dude, that's crazy.
Is there awesome. A more direct way to do it?
No, I mean, no.
Yeah,
I don't think unless you have some crazy like unless.
Sure.
Like Burkhardt does, right? Because he has a massive following.
I DM'd him.
But I mean, like with his podcast. Like,
he's got a great show too.
Like if he messages someone, there's like, I don't know, an over 50% chance that anyone will have heard of him. Like no matter who it is.
Yeah.
Like probably the person is going to know who he is. And so it's like a likely yes.
Uh-huh. Well, actually, I will say I did have like, were you going to say something else?
No.
I had this really random story, kind of like an in, but to go back to the very beginning of the show, and I love him so much. My friend Max, he did film with me at this camp that we worked at in Santa Cruz. But, so I asked a friend to come on. Episode 1, I'm like, I have this idea. We can do a podcast out of the van because I got solar and all this stuff. And then he was like, yeah, whatever. And so I brought it to his house. And then the second guest I had on was, are you familiar with G-Eazy, the hip hop artist? He sings that song, Me, Myself, and I.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So back in 2018, I went to his show. I was like a big fan of his, and I snuck a camera into the venue in a cereal box because you could bring food in the venue, but not cameras. I'm like, I'm going to make a film, and I'm going to show it to them.
Holy shit.
So I did, and his drummer saw it, and Blizzy, and he DM'd me and he's like, do you like to travel? And I was like, yeah.
Wait. Sorry.
Yeah.
You're going to have to rewind this story. You went to a G-Eazy concert.
Oh, yeah, I filmed from the crowd, just like got cool shots and put together a video.
What camera did you smuggle in?
These, GH5.
And there was no bouncer? That was just, I guess it's just,
No.
in a G-Eazy concert, it's sort of...
No, yeah, I looking back, I could have gotten kicked out for sure. But, luckily I didn't.
Dude, that is badass. Okay, so
Blizzy saw it. Blizzy saw this video I put together, and he hit me up. I was working at the Apple store at the time, and I was sitting in a meeting in the Apple store, and I get this DM from Blizzy, and he's like, do you like to travel? And I was like, yeah. And he flew me out.
Sounds like a weird Tinder pickup line.
Yeah. But no, I had met him that night too briefly, like, hey, you're Blizzy. Like, I was a fan of these guys, and I was like, let's get a selfie. And so he didn't remember that, but he was like, that's a cool video. Like, do you want to shoot out on tour? And he flew me out, and 2 weeks later, I was like on the tour bus, like on the G-Eazy tour on the East Coast. Yeah, like filming.
Dude, this must have been a heater of a reel that you made.
I'll show you. It's cool.
How do you... Wow, I'm so curious, like how you can film like a good video that they would be stoked on from the crowd.
Yeah, I could move around because it was GA, and then you're just getting like cool slow motion shots, and then just he had cool pyrotechnics, and you're just like putting something together. I mean, I can do better work now, but I mean, they liked it, and
dude, that is so badass.
Yeah, so they were really cool. So I spent the week there on the bus, and then so episode 2 for this, his G-Eazy's DJ Quiz does like solo shows as well. And I saw that he was coming through to Sacramento. So I hit him up and I was like, hey, I'm trying this new thing. Would you want to do it? And he's like, yeah, whatever you need. So that was episode 2, and then it's hard to get people to commit to a van podcast. I'm just some guy with a white van doing a podcast, and you get a lot of no's, but then some yeses. And as you do more, you're like, okay, it's like people see it's a legit thing.
Yeah.
And then it's just a matter of who's going to see the message and who's going to want to spend the time.
Dude, that's the thing that I've learned over the years about successful and famous people is they're just fucking normal people.
Yeah.
Like once they realize, cause the thing is, the reason that, and speaking of another amazing podcast, Bill Simmons had wow, I'm blanking. Ben Affleck and the other dude in Good Will Hunting, Jason Bourne.
Oh, Matt Damon?
Matt Damon on the podcast together. And they were talking about what it's like to be famous, like really famous. Because famous people get this reputation of like being really standoffish, obviously, and having a big guard up, and some of them losing their minds. And for really, really famous people, it's almost like, how could you not lose your mind? Like the really famous people who don't lose their mind are like in the minority practically.
It's a weird way to live. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm very far from famous, but I've gotten just enough of a taste of being treated differently to know how much that actually sucks. Like even around Durango, like I'll be at a coffee shop getting a coffee, just standing at the barista counter or whatever, and I just see like a phone with someone just like taking a photo or filming of me. And it's not like they didn't talk to me. And it's just this weird like zoo animal feel for a second. And obviously that happens fairly infrequently, but to imagine being so famous that you can't even go to the coffee shop because everyone will have their phone out and that will happen wherever you go. Like, that sounds like hell, honestly. And as a culture, like, we glorify fame and, being super rich and all these things like crazy. Like, no matter who you ask, like, probably if you said, hey, magic wand, you can be really famous, most people would say yes.
Yeah. That's it.
But I think most famous people probably wish that they weren't famous.
That's so interesting.
Anyway, where I'm going with that is, in my experience, the famous people, like the really famous people I know, they just want friends that treat them like normal people. And so if you like catch them in the right moment, they're probably really friendly. Like most, whether it's G-Eazy and his crew or whoever else, like if you catch them in the right moment, they're just normal people that just want friends, and they want friends that aren't going to treat them like famous people.
Yeah.
So that's sweet. I mean, that's really cool that you had that experience, and it doesn't surprise me at all, I guess. Right. That's my point.
Yeah. And I definitely consider you famous for sure, by the way. But through doing this podcast, I have definitely come to that realization quite early on that, again, people are people, Yeah. And I mean, speaking for me personally, like, I'm someone who is a Christian. So I look at the world through, we're all, from, the creator, and, looking at people who have extreme, notoriety in their field. I look at people as being all people.
Yeah.
So that's how I've come to that realization.
Yep.
But for you, seeing, the cameras come out a little bit, at what point is it like validating for, what you've been able to achieve through your craft? And then at what point do you think, okay, this is not what I want?
I think I'm in another, so I listen to Bill Simmons' podcast like crazy. So another Bill Simmons moment. He had Jason Isbell on a couple of days ago, who's an amazing musician, for those that don't know. And Jason Isbell is way more famous than me, obviously, but he thinks he's in this sweet spot where he has everything he could ever want, and he can get like any table in the world, restaurant-wise, at the drop of a hat, but he's probably not going to be bothered when he's eating dinner. So there's that like fine line, and I think it's very circumstantial. I'm sure he has moments where he really doesn't like being famous. For me, like today, it was validating. Like having 3 random people in 3 totally different scenarios say, love the podcast. That made me feel good. It made me feel like that part of hard work matters. Like it's bringing something to other people's lives in a way that is meaningful. But if like I've had a different one, also happened today. I was finishing my first set of intervals, and I was absolutely like breathing out of my ears. I was totally on the limit. And this dude on an e-bike rode up. He was like, "Hey, man." And I was like, I'm going to try this is in my head. I'm going to try so hard to sound polite right now, but I am hyperventilating, and I know it's not going to sound polite. And I was like, I'm sorry. In the middle of an interval, give me a minute. Give me a minute and a half. And he was respectful. But in a moment like that, it's kind of like, it's the timing thing, right? Mm-hmm. So at the gas station, when the person was like, we love the podcast, great timing. When I'm fighting tooth and nail to hit a power number in the last interval and someone wants to talk, not great timing.
Yeah.
Or, at a race when like we've had a super stressful day and I'm exhausted, and maybe my partner Nicole and I are like having a momentary argument about something, and someone's like, hey, can we get a photo? You're like, fuck, not right now. And then you have to like hit this switch where you're like happy, nice guy, but you're actually like really bumming because you're in a tiff with your partner.
Yeah.
So it's all circumstantial. I definitely don't want to like, I don't know. It's a better question for someone that's actually famous, because I think it's all relative, and I think that the way Jason Isbell put it was really spot on. Do not envy what Matt Damon and and folks of that stature have at all.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I think, like you said, if people really got that, they'd be like, oh, I wish I had it the way it was before.
100%.
But the cool thing, too, is that if you do, you have this awesome podcast, too, which I want to ask before you go. But, if you get recognized, I think this goes along the lines of the theme of the people I have on. I love talking with people who are kind. And for you to even just, like, in your mind, tell yourself, like, just take a minute and give this guy, a moment where you can, be friendly. That's incredible. So if you can use that, like, success or that, recognizability for good, I think that's so impactful too. Because, for what it is, like, celebrities are the ones who are on TV, or, names, household names are household names. And if they can be positive people and put something good out, I think all the more power to them too.
For sure. Yeah. And one thing I try to remember too is when I was a junior racer and going to all these races, I remember scenarios where it's so hard because for a lot of folks, like, the 5 seconds that they interact with you is how they define you, because they see things online and they formulate this opinion of you. And then when they have that in-person interaction, those 5 seconds and whatever circumstances surround that 5 seconds is ultimately how they decide who you are, because it's the interaction that they had in person. And that's why it really drives me crazy when, you hear things like XYZ athlete or actor or actress, like, they're such a jerk. And it's just like this blanket statement about their character. It's like, what
was the situation?
Wait, they're 100% a jerk? I think that's unlikely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it comes from a place of like, well, they're known for the 7 seconds where they were surrounded by 37 paparazzi. Is that their best moment? Probably not.
That's a good point.
So anyway, I super don't remember where I was going with that, but
being kind, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I remember. So when I was a junior racer, I remember going up to the pros who I just revered, and sometimes they were really gracious with their time, and other times they came across as cold. Like, even if they said hi back or they signed, a hat or something, their demeanor, like, they weren't smiley. They didn't ask a question about you. And I remember thinking like, man, I'm bummed about that. Like, I really look up to this person and I want them to be my friend, kind of, or at least pretend like they're my friend for a second. And then having the tables turned these days, it is unbelievable how many directions you're pulled in. And sometimes when someone cruises by and they're the 37th person that's cruised by that day to say hi, and you have a sponsor that's like, we are 10 minutes late to do this thing, and you're thinking only about that, the person that cruises by, they get a hi back and that's it. But I really try to remember being that junior racer, because if you can put everything else on hold and realize that being kind and being personable to that person that's coming by to say hi, that like literally nothing else matters more, because I don't think it does. You might change someone's life. Like, you might be the person that like encourages a 14-year-old racer that what they're doing, what they're dreaming about is fun and cool and is a happy thing, because we're all just out there riding bikes, It can be hard in the moment, but it's something that I'm thinking about a lot. And again, I'm lucky to be in a position where like I can hold just enough of that space, hopefully, to be that person. I can't imagine a LeBron James or some of these truly A-list athletes where they have thousands upon thousands of people clamoring. Like, I don't know how you maintain that, but I think if we can all just sort of like, whatever position you're in, when you're in a checkout line, like saying hi to the person that's bagging your groceries, like I think those things go so far, far. Just like being personable to people, especially in this day and age where so many of us view the world through our phones, like that face-to-face contact, those little moments throughout the day, I think can just go so far.
That's a phenomenal perspective. And not even just for yourself to carry yourself that way, because you think about it like going to a concert. It's, whoever is, Taylor Swift, it's her 20th night in a row, but it's that fan's first night seeing her.
Yes,
So you think of it like that.
Exactly.
So that's a great perspective, but it's also then awesome that people who listen to this will get to hear, like, if they have a moment with someone who is in the middle of something and then they act kind of cold. Maybe they're not acting cold, maybe it's just, we're all human beings, doing this thing and called life, and everybody's going through something. So to have a little bit of like understanding too. That's a great perspective for both
I remember way back when I was dating this girl who worked in a grocery store, and she came back from work one day and was just talking about how the customers never really acknowledge her as a person. Like a grocery store employee is just like a glorified like information like roving. You're just like you're a billboard that like, where's this thing I need? I can't find this. Do you have this on sale? Do you have whatever? And like, you're just a piece of the grocery store. And how much that sucked to go through day in and day out. And to have that be 8 to 5 days a week. And it really stuck with me. And I try hard to, if I'm in a grocery store or any other setting, and I need something from an employee, rather than jumping directly to, hey, do you have blueberries? Say, hey, how's it going? How's your day?
Yeah.
Then, do you have blueberries?
I like that.
And from what she told me, like, it goes so far.
Mm-hmm. I think of that all the time at the grocery store when you hear people, and it's totally a fine thing to say with, whoever starts it, like, hey, how's it going? Good, how are you? Like, but I try to take an extra second and go, don't just say, how are you? Like, say, like, I'm actually doing all right. Like, and then make them feel like you mean it. You know?
Rather
like,
than the small talk thing.
The tone, it's all about tone. Like,
100%.
I love that you think that way. That's so cool. Kind of going along the same lines too, about how you carry yourself and what you value and this idea of, putting out into the world, good things. Can you talk a little bit about your nonprofit work with World Bicycle Foundation? Is that
World
right?
Bicycle Relief, yeah.
Relief, yes.
Yeah, so World Bicycle Relief is one of the most impressive organizations, nonprofits in the bike industry, in the bike world. Kind of going back to what I said earlier about the bike being really efficient, what they recognized is that bikes just mobilize people. For someone who might have to walk to school 5 miles each way, each day, that takes a long time on foot. But if you have a bike, that's, I don't know, a half hour at most. Maybe you're someone that sells goods and the market is far away, you get the drift there. So I've always tried to keep World Bicycle Relief in mind. I've done stuff here and there. I actually haven't done anything the last few years because I've shifted my focus to my partner Nicole's nonprofit, which also works in developing countries. But it's so adjacent to me that it's easier to have a much bigger impact, obviously. And I just really believe in what she's doing. And so most of my energy these days goes to that. It's called Path of Logic, which is sort of a play on words because it has to do with cancer, which is pathologic. So Nicole is a PA and anatomist. So basically she has worked for a long time in dissection. So she gets, it's sort of a long story, but basically she gets pieces of people and then looks for cancer in these samples. It sounds really gruesome, but it could be something as small as it can be very small tissue samples. Anyway, it's a long story. I've done a handful of podcasts with her, and I need to do another one because the work she's doing is just so full gas. But basically, she had an opportunity to work with Harvard in Uganda, and it was a different project. But one of the things they lamented is that Uganda didn't have a way to keep track of patient records reliably. So they basically had the system they were using was this big book, and they would write down a patient's information. And then when they took a sample, the patient would go away, and then getting the patient back for continued treatment was like not a successful proposition because everything would get lost. It was just a very poor record keeping system. And they were like, we're really limited in what we can do here because we can't keep track of anything. And we're never going to be able to keep track of anything because they don't have reliable Wi-Fi. And so we can't have an online record keeping system. And Nicole has many, many talents, but one of them is the ability, two things, the ability to see a problem and come up with a creative solution. And then also, and this is really the key to that first part, is finding connections and opportunities with the people involved and like involving them. So instead of again, this is a huge conversation, but one of the biggest issues with international nonprofit work and social work is that people come in from other places and they try to implement solutions that worked in their place in a different place. And for a bunch of obvious reasons, it very rarely works. One of the most terrible and famous examples is in Haiti, where basically the Blue Cross went down there or the Red Cross? Red Cross went down there to, I was thinking Blue Cross, Blue Shield. The Red Cross went down there to help with a bunch of environmental devastation, handled things really poorly, and basically introduced tuberculosis to the entire place and just caused way more havoc than originally was the case. And that's happened globally as long as humans have tried to help other humans. Nicole's incredible talent is that she basically collaborates with the people in the place to come up with solutions that actually make sense for them. And so pretty quickly she developed an online record keeping system that could stay online without reliable internet, and is now a nationally adopted record keeping system throughout Uganda. And the surrounding African countries are clamoring for this system to be implemented in their countries as well. And that's just like one of like 20 projects she's working on with Path of Logic. So she's actually there right now. And yeah, I mean, it's endlessly inspiring. And when I talked at the beginning of this conversation about how it's going to be interesting to transition away from racing, I actually have a lot of optimism about what that's going to look like, because I think I'm going to be able to pretty easily transition into what she's working on and feel very fulfilled doing all that. But yeah, that's the most brief thumbnail sketch I can give. It's big.
That is so cool, though. Wow. I actually work at a hospital, so
oh, really?
Hearing people help in medical ways like that, that's so cool. Mm-hmm. And I never would have thought, like, of course, things that rely on networks and things where that's less prevalent. Huge.
Yeah, I mean, really what her first big lesson in that is she actually went to Haiti to try to set up a bunch of this medical equipment to... it basically, I forget who I think it was University of Florida maybe that sent her down there, and they had all of this fancy, multi-$1,000 equipment that they were all proud of and excited to help with, and like they didn't even think about the fact of like, are we going to have a way to plug this stuff in? So they had all of this crazy expensive stuff go down there and didn't even have a reliable power source. And so they basically just contributed like super, super expensive trash. Oh. And the project just like failed. And that happens constantly.
Really?
Because there's no forethought. There's no like...
They just assume because we have power here readily available.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's like we can... And it's a very Western way of thinking. Like we can fix it with money. We can fix it with tech. We can fix it with more complicated solutions, but a lot of times the solutions are simple. But you just have to have the right perspective. I say this like I've done it, but I listen. The person I live with, it's constantly talking to me about this. So.
Well, again, I'm so inspired by not only you, but now your partner as well. You both are putting so much good out into the world.
She makes me look like nothing, guaranteed.
That is just phenomenal, though. I know you've got some more big training plans for tomorrow, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. But can you give us a little insight on anything coming up next? Like any goals for the season, or just even in terms of a longer term? You talked about your last 10 years and what your next 10 plus would look like as well. So I don't know if you want to go small picture, big picture.
Yeah. Well, the main part of my season is about to kick off here in a couple weeks. I'll be back here in Monterey for that Sea Otter Classic. Competitively, that Lifetime Grand Prix will be the main focus of my year. Also at Sea Otter, we're going to be basically doing a pre-release premiere of the next film I helped produce, which is Crossing Tasmania. So it's sort of like a sequel to Crossing Iceland, which I'm really excited about a 22-minute film. And we'll have a little event around that, little gathering. I don't know when this will go out, but we'll be doing others. We'll do one, I think it's in CU Boulder, May 1st. And then we're going to do one at BOA headquarters in Denver also in June. But anyway, that's something I'm looking forward to short term. Definitely looking forward to the race season. This Grand Prix is an awesome opportunity for folks in my position. I had an insane amount of bad luck last year between the injury and some mechanicals and then getting deathly ill for the last round. So I'm really looking forward to some redemption there. And then just planning this next crossing. We have an awesome list written down and had a couple of folks from different parts of the world reach out recently after we did the one in Tasmania, kind of nominating their home islands and giving some insights into why they think their island would be a good place, what it has to offer. So that's been really fun. Cool. Again, opportunities to connect with people around the world and learn different things about this awesome planet. So I would say long term, it's stuff like that I'm looking forward to.
That's incredible. It's just phenomenal, again, what you're doing both on and off the bike. We've talked so much about kindness already, so that is so great and so appreciated and so needed in this world. And so I want everybody to listen to this, but also your podcast, The Adventure Stache, which I'm sure is just a blast, like we talked about earlier a lot, but it's a great show. So listen to that. And I just thank you again for coming on the Vancast and look forward to following you this season.
Feel like I'm at the tippy top of my game, looking down at the raft. Confidence, come on now.